speaker is Dave Moxham. Dave is Deputy General Secretary of the STUC. I know he's done a power of work around the country, speaking at meetings and to shop stewards, conveners and broader meetings about the impact of this bill and what the STUC are doing about it. So, welcome to speak.
Thanks very much, John. So Jackson very skillfully and completely annoyingly covered nearly everything that needed to be covered in terms of detail and analysis. He forgot a couple of things, and then Lynn very skillfully and annoyingly remembered them and put them in too, leaving me in the situation where you're going to hear probably some of the same things, although maybe presented in a slightly different way, and then focusing on a couple of particular things that the STUC is looking to do over the next couple of months with respect to this bill. I mean, my starting point for this is, and everyone has a different view of how they formulate this, but what makes the decent society, in my view, what makes the socialist society, and I look towards decent publicly owned housing, I look towards proper democratically owned public services, I look at a properly democratically owned economy and key utilities. I look at a decent social security system as the pillars of the decent society, and my fifth pillar, and no less important than the other, is a free and fair and open and powerful trade union movement. Because there's one thing that the left and the right agree on absolutely completely when it comes to the economy. Economies that have decent, strong trade unions are more equal societies. The international evidence is absolutely clear. The only difference between the right and left is we think that's a good idea and they think it's a bad idea. But the academic evidence is clear and no one disputes it. And therefore, the question of how we help people to understand how important that pillar is the key issue that both Jackson and Lynn have been talking about, and I agree with them, and I agree with Jackson in particular when he says maybe through all these difficulties we will find in this bill an opportunity to take forward some of the campaigning that we've maybe not managed to do as effectively as we should have done. Now, I've been working very closely in Westminster with the MPs, the Scottish MPs, as you know, predominantly SNP MPs, and in particular with Chris Stevens, who leads for the SNP on the bill. He's doing sterling work, working really closely with us, just as importantly working really closely with the Labour opposition down south to try and maximise opposition to this bill. And Chris has been on the bill committee, and he came off the bill committee and he said, one thing I'm absolutely clear about, the Tories don't understand trade unions. And on one level I agreed with him, they don't understand what we do on a day-and-daily basis. But on another one, I kind of fundamentally disagreed with him, because actually the Tories understand exactly what trade unions do. And what we essentially do is three things. We represent people in the workplace on an individual basis when they're in trouble. Secondly, we collectivise that experience, and we say when it comes to pay, terms and conditions and other key aspects which will protect us, and mean we have to do less of those individual cases, we act collectively and we negotiate collectively. But also we recognise that we have a wider political outlook. We need to change the laws that regulate what employers do, and more than that, we need to have something to say about the economic and social justice circumstances in which we operate, whether we're members of unions or not. That's the three things we do, and that's the three things that Tories understand, and that's what they're attacking. So if you look at what they're trying to do on facility time, on check-off, some of the things you'll have heard less about, wrapping unions in reporting red tape requirements and the rest of it, it's a basic attempt to lessen the amount of time, the amount of capacity that we have to do that basic number one function, represent people in the workplace. They then understand, because we act collectively, that they have to attack the right to strike, and probably more importantly, they have to attack our capacity to strike effectively. So that's why we have thresholds brought in, that's why we have employers freed, if they choose to do so, to use agency workers to scab strikes. And I don't run away, I hope most people here don't run away with using that word, to scab strikes, because they understand that if they can take away the right to strike, they can undermine that second collective principle when we act together in the workplace to secure our rights. The third thing they want to do is to attack our political function through attacking the political levy, and let nobody in this room be confused about the fact that this is about the Labour Party. This is about far more than the Labour Party. This is about the right of unions, whether affiliated or not, to do that more wide campaign. So the STUC in 3 weeks' time will be running the anti-racist march in Glasgow in June. We ran that, along with the People's Assembly, we had the big anti-austerity rally in Glasgow. I'm going to hot-foot it from here in a minute and speak about a Palestinian event in Glasgow. They don't want us to do these things for the reasons that Jackson explained and Lynn alluded to, because they understand that we might not have hit the heights in terms of our opposition to them over the last 5 years, but they understand that we have the capacity to do so. We still have across the UK 6.5 million members. We have in Scotland well over 600,000 members. We are still the largest democratic organisation in these islands, and that has a potential, and it has a potential that they fear. So what do we need to do about that? So if we go back to those 3 things, what do we need to do? The first thing, and Jackson alluded to this, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit of detail, is we need to speak to public sector employers, like the councils that Jackson spoke about, like the Scottish Government, like anybody else who's prepared to come with us in this, and say, we are not prepared to implement the parts of this bill which insist that we limit the facility time of people in terms of representing members and try and prevent us from deducting union dues at source through check-off. Now, there's a very clear democratic argument about this, and I'm just going to run through it just so people are relatively clear about it. What the UK government said was, in order to save taxpayers' money, we are going to prevent the Scottish Government, local authorities, including local authorities in England and in Wales, from doing these things. They didn't say we're going to do it to the private sector. They didn't say we're going to remove check-off for charity deductions or for cycle hire schemes or for pension contributions. They said we're just going to do this for unions, and we're just going to do it in the public sector, and we're just going to do it there to save taxpayers' money. Well, there's a problem with that. It's not their money to save. Because anybody, it doesn't matter whether you vote yes or no, or what your view is on devolution or more powers and the rest of it, everybody understands that once that money is devolved through the Barnett formula to Scotland, it's the Scottish Government and local authorities' money to spend. So there's a fundamental democratic problem here. If they were saying nobody can use check-off, if they were saying we're going to cap everybody's facility time, I could understand that that democratic problem might not exist, but that's not what they're saying. They're saying just public sector employers. And for me, that gives a prima facie democratic reason for the justification for what local authorities have already decided to do, and in my view, a responsibility on the Scottish Government to do the same. Now, we're also hoping that those local authorities and the Scottish Government will do some of the other things that Jackson said. They don't have to use scab labelling. They don't have to report us for supposed breaches of the new trade union law if it passes. They don't have to engage in some of those repressive activities with respect to picketing. We hope they don't do that. But the argument against not implementing those 2 parts of the bill that I spoke about is a democratic argument as well as an argument about being opposed to the trade union bill. On Tuesday that's going to be debated in the Scottish Parliament. And I've been delighted so far with the support that we've managed to achieve from all political parties across Scotland, obviously with the exception of the Tories, with respect to this bill. But Tuesday is a very big day, because on Tuesday we have the opportunity to unite local government and national government in Scotland, SNP and Labour, trade union and communities, all in a very clear message which says we are not accepting this and we will not comply. And if that happens, not only will that protect our members and our ability to look after our members in the workplace, it will also cause significant problems for this bill as a whole, because the UK government will have to answer what it will do in that circumstances. And local authorities in England might say, hang on a minute, that sounds like a good idea. We can, in Scotland, on Tuesday, present a genuine challenge to this bill, which won't just do the things that I talked about, but may actually sink it if not sink it, then at least hold it below the waterline. And that's why I wanted to talk about that in some detail. I also want to talk just very briefly about the two other aspects. What about this removal, this attack on our collective rights thresholds and the avowal that strikes will be broken by employers at will? I think Jackson's right. I think Lynn's right. It's not my job from the STUC's perspective to tell them what to do, but I believe that unions could and should be supported if they say, we will be the judges of whether industrial action is going to be effective or not ballot threshold. We will be the judges. We will only support action, we only ever support action if we think it's going to be effective. We don't send people over the trenches to be shot down if we don't think we can get support for an action. That's not in our interest. We will be the judges. And if they choose to be the judges of that, it will be the job of the STUC, the People's Assembly and communities across Scotland to be there with them when they do it. The third thing I want to talk about, just briefly, is political campaigning. Because if they're trying to say at this point that unions should be doing less of that broader political campaigning, there's only one answer to that: do more of it. There's only one answer to that: do more of it, and do more of it now. And we knew in June when this was coming, and we worked with the People's Assembly and other organisations to hold a big rally in George Square. We knew this was coming, and we were saying early and quickly, we're going to do more of this, not less. And I can announce today that we're going to be, very soon we're going to be advertising a major rally in the concert hall in Glasgow, which will absolutely link those two key messages, the trade union bill and the fight against austerity. And those campaigns need to go together, need to go forward together and not separately. I'm just going to finish, I think, with this. There is a fourth thing, and Lynn touched on it. When the TUC asked young people in particular what they thought about the trade union bill, they did a big poll, 2,500 people. Young people said, we oppose the trade union bill, we support the right to strike, because that's a really good thing for people like you. There's a couple of young people here, but most of us are over that particular hurdle. It's a good idea for people like you, but it's not really anything to do with us. And that reflected a view that people, young people, particularly in the sort of work that they're doing, think that trade unions are a good thing, but it doesn't suit their working experience. It doesn't touch on to what they do. So the fourth thing that we need to do, and the STUC's got a campaign just now, which I invite you to look up, called Better Than Zero. Unite the Union has got a Unite Community, and a range of other campaigning campaigning efforts which look to channel this. We have to have a message for young people going forward too. We have to get active for young people in the type of workplaces that aren't currently unionised. We have to have an offer for them. It may not be the same offer. It's very hard to go into McDonald's and sign up people to a union. That's why we've been outside these places trying to offer support from there. But as we take this campaign forward, as we say, we want to sink this trade union bill, we want to get people to understand how widely it affects them in all of their communities and all of their lives, we have to have a message for those young workers. So I'd encourage everybody here, particularly shop stewards, particularly people who are in active and in organised workplaces, to come with the STUC on this additional thing and some of the other unions. Come with us in those particular campaigns that we will be running in the period ahead to make young workers, put young workers in charge of some of their own campaigning, to follow them in terms of some of the ways they want to campaign against poor work. By doing that, by working in communities, and by getting the sort of political support that I talked about earlier, I believe we can have a really strong campaign going forward, and one through which we might end up stronger rather than weaker. Thanks very much.